I worked at a Tim Hortons all 4 years while I was in college, and at the time, I had a really sweet coworker named Sophie. She was very bright and a little on the short side. Honestly, I thought she was only 14 when, in reality, she was already 16. During a shift one day, she taps me on the shoulder and asks if I can come serve a customer up front right now. I didn't think anything of it at first. I get out there to find a man. He was definitely in his late 20s and of Indian descent, so I just chalked it up to him having a heavy accent as to the reason I was asked to handle his order. As I took and made his order, he was constantly leaning over the counter, peering around and looking at the staff members. I noticed that Sophie hadn't come out from the back yet. I quickly finished his order and wished him a good day. He just sort of nodded and did one more look before leaving. Once he was out of the door, Sophie came out from the back and explained that he had been randomly showing up there a lot during her shift and would wait until her cashier was open for orders. I understood it was making her uncomfortable, so I just told her if I was on shift to come grab me and I would deal with his order. This went on for a few months. He never said anything inherently disturbing, so there wasn't really any way to ban him from our location. We soon learned that he knew what Sophie's car looked like, and if he didn't see her up front, he would go through the drive-thru in hopes of seeing her. Too bad for him, she was on coffees and my uncheerful face was always there when he arrived. Finally, one night, I was getting off shift, a late shift, when I saw my older sister outside. Confused, I then asked her what she was doing there, and she told me she was just there with a guy she had been chatting with. Suddenly, that same creepy Indian guy appeared and gave my sister a hug. My sister quickly introduced me to him. Somehow, taking my hair out of a ponytail and throwing my hood over my shirt changed my appearance enough that he didn't recognize me. I just nodded a hello and told my sister I was heading home. She then followed me back to my car, simply to ask why I was being so rude. I straight up told her that her friend had been stalking my coworker to just the right degree that she couldn't do anything about it. At first, my sister wanted to brush it off, until I informed her of my coworker's age and that he knew when she worked. A few days went by and the guy didn't show up again. I ended up asking my sister about him, and she simply said he hadn't denied it, and that the two of them had a conversation. And whatever she said must have really scared him off. So, to the creeper who was stalking my coworker at Tim Hortons, let's never meet again. I used to work a warehouse job as a temp laborer a couple of years back. It was around Christmas time, so everyone was expected to work overtime. It was going to be a long night. The news came very much to my dismay, but I needed the money at the time, and I didn't have a steady job back then. I had just finished a 15-hour shift that night. The midnight air was bone-chilling in my lungs, but I was just happy to finally be outside. I took a few minutes and then prepared myself for the long trip home. As I left the warehouse, I looked at my phone for the time, which only had 12% battery, of course. 4 a.m. I had no idea how I was going to get home. The bus service was very limited at this time. I figured I'd hit a main road and try and catch a cab from there. But it was about a 15-minute walk to get there, so I began to cut through the industrial buildings and made my way down the dark alleys and loading zones. And then, from the corner of my eye, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move in the distance. I initially figured it was my mind playing games. I had been walking through dark and bright areas intermediately, so I attributed it to that and continued walking. I first chose to ignore it, but then I had a strange feeling flood over my body, The hairs on my body stood up, and I decided to take off my left headphone. I could hear the sound of footsteps, growing closer and closer, and then I felt the tip of a knife touching the base of my spine. "Give me all of your goddamn money, and I won't have to hurt you." I was paralyzed with fear. I never turned around. One wrong move, and I would never walk another day. I sure as hell wasn't going to risk my life for $30, so I let him know that I was reaching for my wallet and pulled out the cash. "And your phone." Again, I was really tight on money at the time, so I had only been using a monthly membership flip phone. The man seemed to scoff in disappointment, choosing not to take my phone. He stood silently for a moment. Then he sighed, perhaps in realization and understanding of my situation and what he was doing. "All right, now get out of here before I change my mind." The sound of his footsteps faded as he slowly walked back into the shadows. I ran like the wind and never looked back. So, to the guy who robbed and nearly killed me for a fix, let's not meet again. This happened to me when I was around 15 years old. Growing up, I visited my father and stepmother every summer for about a month. One evening while I was visiting, my stepmom and I went for a walk around the neighborhood. The walk started out completely normal, until it wasn't. As we were walking past these two houses, whose backyards were in complete view, we spotted something so strange happening between them that we stopped dead in our tracks. For like 20 seconds, we stood in silence, trying to decipher what our eyes were seeing. Keep in mind, the sun was setting, so it was getting kind of dark. First, we see a dog in one of our yards. It was standing right at the fence line and peering into the neighboring yard. The fences were those metal chain link ones that you can see through. Then we see the thing the dog was looking at. In the other yard, crouched low to the ground, was at first glance this unidentifiable mass. Was it another dog? No. A child playing outside? No. It was a completely naked man on all fours, crouching on the ground and crawling. He slowly crawled towards the dog in the most disturbing and disgusting way I have ever seen a human move. Behind him were his clothes, perfectly folded in a pile, waiting to be put back on. My stepmom and I couldn't form our words as we watched this man approach this confused dog. When he reached the fence line where the dog stood, he then proceeded to shove his face into the fence to what appeared to be him greeting the dog. After my stepmom and I fully realized what we were seeing, we turned around and darted home to tell my father, who was a cop. He didn't believe us one bit. My stepmom and I tend to make everything we experience together 20 times more dramatic, but he eventually bought our very real account and called it in. We later found out that this creep is known for breaking into people's yards, stripping naked, and playing with their pets. My stepmom feels bad about young me seeing that, but I think it's a funny way to see your first nude man. So, to the crazy naked man crawling outside, let's not meet again. I work in the restaurant industry, and I've come across some pretty interesting people. Kitchens, I feel in particular, are the underworld of the service industry, often employing people with fringe elements. To put it briefly, people who are running from something in their past and want a sense of structure in their chaotic lives. I've worked with many interesting people, to say the least. Drug addicts, strays, social outcasts, and ex-convicts. There's a certain level of fear knowing that someone previously charged with aggravated assault is working right next to you in a fast-paced, high-stress environment. At any moment, that person could snap and take that 8-inch knife he was using to chiffonade basil and slit your throat if you pissed him off during the dinner rush. My good chef, who worked at many 5-star restaurants in Toronto, had many interesting stories to tell while we had beers after a crazy day at work. One of them was about an old guy named Michael Verney, a rather friendly old man, but quiet, and kept to himself for the most part. He always showed up on time, did his job, and went home. He was a great cook, but there was something that seemed off about him. Within his first week, all the cooks in the kitchen teased him and called him Vinny, the serial killer. He was a good sport about it, though, and was witty enough to dish it out as well, making him a respected member of the crew. Vinny would laugh, take it all in good stride, and often play along with the rest of the cooks. Those jokes were all in good fun, until recently. You see, his real name is Michael Wentworth, and in February 2019, Michael was charged in Kingston, Ontario for 3 murders spanning between 1995 and 2001. But that's not the only thing he's been convicted of. He's been linked to numerous crimes and has been convicted of armed robbery, disguised with intent, and possession of an explosive device, to name a few. It's crazy to think that any one of us could be working alongside a murderer who seems like a totally normal person. So, Michael Wentworth, let's not meet.
So, this happened a while back, and I thought I'd share this here. Me and my boyfriend at the time were living in the semi-spacious studio apartment that belonged to his dad. We just moved back from England and needed somewhere to stay while we looked for a new place. It was newly renovated, and we had to be out of there pretty quickly because his dad wanted to start renting it out. There was no way we were able to afford the full rent for this place, so we just gave him what we could spare, and I guess his dad wasn't all too hot on the idea of his son and girlfriend, 18 and 21 at the time, living there, being as young and stupid as we were together. It was on the 3rd floor, and he recently got a permit to build a roof deck outside. You can walk onto it through the kitchen, and it's kind of level with the neighbor's bedroom window. We were aware that it must have felt a little invasive, so we tried to be considerate about how late we went out on it and about noise and stuff. The tension started to grow between us when we were outside on a Saturday night, having a smoke and just talking at a reasonable volume. Then suddenly we hear a harrowing,
"Will you both shut the fuck up and go the fuck back inside?"
I looked at my boyfriend and just burst out laughing. I looked around to see where it was coming from, and it was an old sweaty hippo of a man, peering out of his window, gasping for air as he looked at us. He looked as though he was about to kill us. My then boyfriend said,
"Mate, you could also just ask us normally to keep the noise down."
To which he started spewing countless obscenities and barking at us to go back inside. We didn't want his dad to get any complaints about us, so we just went back into the house. Several days later, we get a phone call from his dad saying that the neighbor had called him, saying we were blasting music all weekend, screaming and had lots of people over. He said he had to call the police. The thing is, even if he had called the police, we would have been none the wiser because we weren't even there. That Sunday morning, we were going out of town for a few days, so it made no sense. Over the course of a few weeks, every time we'd go out to water the plants on the deck or hang up some clothing we had washed, he would use any excuse to shout abuse at us. It was fucking traumatizing.
The pressure on your hose is too high. Your clothes are fucking blocking my sunlight.
And some mornings we would eat out on the deck, and he would complain about the noise of our cutlery clinking on the plates. It was ridiculous. He would constantly tell us how the roof deck shouldn't even be there. So we gave him a copy of the approved permit. Anyway, one afternoon we were kind of getting busy on the couch. Nothing too R-rated, but enough to maybe think of getting curtains that weren't as see-through as ours. So we're doing our thing, and out of nowhere, my boyfriend looks up and out the window, and his face just drops. He gets up and walks towards the window.
What the fuck?
I jump out of my skin and ask him what's wrong, but before he would answer me, he leapt out the window and onto the deck and started banging on our neighbor's window. What just happened? I asked him.
He was fucking filming us. I could see a blinking red light through his blinds, fam.
I was just like, no freaking way. I genuinely didn't believe it at the time and told him it was probably something else. Quite understandably, he wouldn't let it go. My boyfriend would go out at night and try to look through his window for filming gear. You could only see so far back into his room, so there was no actual certainty that he had any of that stuff. My neighbor, that is. And one day, my neighbor left his window open, so I guess he wasn't home. Bear in mind, this was over the course of several weeks. My boyfriend actually climbed halfway through his window, standing on the garden table, and just freaked. At the end of the room, there was just this wall of videotapes with all these dates and names written on them, and loads of heavy-duty camera equipment at the end of his bed. We called the police and told them we were being stalked. Maybe it was just a coincidence at the time, but I think our suspicions were justified considering his character. He was just an all-out horrible and creepy guy, and if he had footage of me half naked, I wasn't going to take that chance. The police informed us that we didn't have sufficient proof that he was filming us, but that they would question him. Without any real evidence, they weren't able to get a warrant to search his house for the tapes. Damn. So, after a while, we decided the only way to do this was to catch him in the act. It was pretty calm between us for a while. After we involved the police, he stopped bothering us, but I still wanted those tapes. One night, we just got back from dinner, and as we're about to go to bed, we hear this knock at the door. It's our other neighbor, who was super cool. They asked us about the neighbor we were having issues with. Total understatement. The whole street knew we were on bad terms. Everyone usually kept to themselves, but they all hated this guy. We told her the whole story, and after talking to her for a while, she offered to call the police and tell them she witnessed him filming us. The police came around the next day and informed us that with our neighbor's testimony, they were able to acquire a warrant to search his apartment. A few days later, we watched the entire thing go down. 2 police officers showed up to his apartment, gave him a letter, and we just watched the whole thing. An hour or so later, he was arrested, and that was that. We didn't hear anything back from the cops for a while, until we got a call saying that he had been filming us for months. He had footage of us eating, of us napping on the couch, me getting changed, my boyfriend working out. It sent shivers down my spine. Not only was I absolutely furious, but really freaked out. We pressed charges, and eventually he got a few months jail time. We eventually moved out, but I never found out what they did with the tapes. I think they're probably in an evidence locker now. But yeah, to the crazy asshole who stalked and terrorized us for months on end, let's never meet again.
When I was 12, me and a group of my friends would play hide and seek in these woods that were on the edge of our neighborhood. We would always play around 6, but had to be back home by 10:30 at the latest on a weekend, and we weren't allowed to go so far in the woods that we couldn't see our houses. Those were the only rules that our parents set out for us. Well, One Friday, we were out playing in the woods, as per usual, and I, for whatever reason, decided to go deeper into the woods. I can't remember how far I went into those woods exactly, but I do remember coming across an old shack. I considered using it as a hiding place, but then I thought that they would come this deep in the woods to look for me, so I decided to head back. However, when I started to head back, I turned my head to look at the shack one last time, and for a split second, I saw someone peeking out of the door. Whoever it was quickly turned their head back when they saw me. I didn't pay too much attention to it and headed back. About halfway through my walk, I hear, "Psst, hey kid, come over here." I looked back and saw an old man hiding behind a tree, gesturing me to come to him. I knew better and took off running. While I was running, I heard him yelling, "Wait," and I could also hear sounds of his footsteps running after me. And when I got to the end of the woods, I ran into my friends who were wondering where I was. I told them to get out of the woods, and we ran to our friend's house. I told them what happened, and eventually I told my mom what happened too. Our parents called the police and searched the woods for the old man, but I don't know if they found him or not. Our parents never let us play in those woods again, and after that, even if they did, I don't think I'd ever go back. So, old man living in a shack in the woods, let's not meet again.
I work at a gas station on a main route. We see a lot of travelers passing through. Only one person works each shift, and it's a 24-hour store. We are short-staffed, so I agreed to an overnight. I work in a state that's always had self-serve gas stations. So this guy comes in. I asked him if he needed any help. He says no. He's getting gas at the pump but needs to use the bathroom. I go back to work on whatever invoices we got yesterday. The guy uses the bathroom and then goes back outside. About 5 or 7 minutes later, he comes back inside and tells me that he's confused about the pump. He directly says,
"You might have to come outside and help me."
Customers don't often say this. They usually just complain that it's not working, so I'm already feeling weird about this guy. I shake it off because he looks like a nerd and I don't feel afraid of him really. I look at the register to see what error it came up for his pump, and there's no errors. The register doesn't even say it was in use. Even if someone tries to pay and nothing's wrong with their payment, it will at least say, payment/loyalty timed out. But literally, it had no sign of him trying to use it before asking me for help. I ask him if he wants to just pay inside. He agrees to, gets his wallet out of his car, and then pays $10. I give him his receipt, and he says,
"Can you help me, lady? I don't understand the machine."
And I say, "We aren't really allowed to leave the store during overnight shifts as it's just me here and it's not safe to go outside." I don't know why I told him I was alone, but he wasn't seemingly threatening. He proceeds to say,
"I don't understand what it's asking me. I need help. I'm not scary."
I tell him again that I can't go outside because it's store policy for the overnight shift, and say, "It's not that you're scary. I just can't go outside. I would have to tell a little old lady asking for help at this hour the same thing." Which is true. We can't even take out the trash during overnights. He starts to walk away from the register counter now, but then again stops at the door and asks me one last time to come outside and help him. I'm pretty annoyed at this point. I've said no twice now. I'm not going, so stop asking. I finally say, in a super annoyed tone, "Okay, all you need to do is 1. Pick up the nozzle, 2. Select fuel grade button, and 3. Put it into your tank and squeeze the handle. I'm not going outside." Then he finally goes back to the car, and the register tells me he had no trouble pumping gas. Also, his plates seemed like they're from the state I work in. This kind of thing wouldn't make me suspicious usually. But the fact that he originally opted for me to go outside instead of bringing money inside at 3 a.m. is weird. Along with how he didn't bother to use the pump before he came back inside to ask for help, claiming it wasn't working, and him not taking my first no for an answer. No means no. So, potential gas station abductor, let's not meet again.
This happened about 4 years ago, when I was 15. I was traveling to see my grandma from the north of England going to the West Country. I was traveling on my own because, aside from me, most of my family didn't talk to my grandma at the time. My grandma lives in the middle of nowhere, whereas I live in the big city. This was the first time I was traveling alone, and it was a long journey that took a total of about 9 hours. Because it was a long journey, and I was still in school at the time, I decided to go on a Friday after school, and return on Sunday to maximize my time with my grandma. This meant getting on the train at 5 p.m. and arriving at around 2 a.m. at my grandma's nearest station. It was summer, and the first bit of my journey was fine. The fact that it was still bright out, and that we were going through big areas with lots of other passengers, really settled my nerves. However, as my journey continued, it grew later into the night. There were less and less people, and I was going through smaller and smaller villages. In my journey, I had to get 3 different trains, and my story begins when waiting for my 3rd train. I'm a nervous traveler, or at least was when I was 15, and I had stupidly decided to smoke a joint waiting for my last train, as I had a 45-minute wait. The train station was tiny and quite dimly lit. It only had 2 platforms, and it didn't have a gate that required a ticket to get through. This meant that anyone could walk in, sit down, and wait for a train. There was no one else at the station, as it was around 1 a.m. So there I was, just casually smoking and listening to music, when suddenly, a man walked into the station. I quickly put it out, worried that I would get in trouble. The station was empty, but the man decided to sit directly opposite of me. He was bald, had a somewhat wrinkly face, but was dressed very young like a teenager, and was very skinny. The fact that he looked so youthful yet old was very unsettling. I could feel him staring at me. I looked up and saw that he had the darkest eyes I've ever seen. I was really freaked out by him, but thought I might be overreacting. A moment passed, and 2 other men walked in, one after the other. They slowly walked up my direction and sat down, one on each side of me, despite there being plenty of free chairs. I could just tell that all these men knew each other. They were taller, wider framed than the other man, and they looked older too. At this point, I was terrified, because they had effectively surrounded me. If I stood up, they could just grab me, and I wouldn't be able to move. I saw the guy sitting opposite of me move his lips. I realized he was talking to me, so I took out one of my headphones. "Pardon?" I asked. "You're not from around here, are you?" he said. They all had a pretty thick West Country accent. "Yes, I am," I lied, knowing it would make me less likely a target, as it would mean I'd have family close by. "Oh? What school do you go to, then?" Oh, crap. I stumbled for a second to think of what else to say. "The Catholic high school," purely guessing that they had one. "Oh, my niece goes there. Her name's Rebecca. Do you know her?" I asked how old she was, so I could guess if it was likely that I knew her. The man then said she was 16, so I told him, "Yeah, I think she's in the year above me." The man then said, "You're a little young to be traveling by yourself." "Yeah, but my dad is checking in on me by calling me every half hour." This is a complete lie, but probably the smartest thing I'd done in my 15 years. "Oh, is he that good?" "Yeah, he's a cop, so he gets really overprotective and worries lots." Also a complete lie. My dad is an IT manager. At this point, the man starts to look a bit worried. "I'm actually going to call him now to tell him I'm about to get on the train." When I said this, it was like I was threatening him, daring him to try and stop me from getting on that train. I go on my phone and proceeded to call my mom, as I don't speak to my dad often. I made sure my headphones were on, so they wouldn't be able to hear her voice. "Hey Dad, I'm about to get on the train in about 10 minutes. I should be at Grandma's in less than an hour." The guy sitting next to me instantly got up and left. I continued to speak nonsense into my phone as I made eye contact with the man sitting opposite of me. I'll never forget the look of anger in his face as I made the call. However, he didn't get up and follow the two men. I was still shitting bricks at that moment, but then I heard the best sound in the world. A crying baby. I turned around and saw a couple with a baby walking into the train station. I have never been more pleased in my life to hear a baby crying in the train station. The creepy man then got up and left as the couple sat down. The train then arrived, and I sat where I could see the couple and that they could see me. I then called my grandma and asked for a lift from the station, because the last thing I wanted to do was walk down the dark country road. When I later told my grandma about it, she said I should talk to the police about it, because apparently people do target strangers passing through the small villages in her area. I'm just glad I was able to bullshit my way through that weird conversation while being stoned. Anyway, creepy guy at the train station, let's not meet again. I've been doing my 1 hour of outdoor exercise at night recently. My neighborhood is very quiet, and I'm lucky to live in such a nice area, which I've always considered very safe. I used to walk at night, even before lockdown, because I live right next to a canal, so there's a lot of nice paths, which are super pretty at night when everything is lit up by the moon. Anyway, I was walking last night, and decided to go to the shop first because I was hungry, and then detour back to my usual route along the canal. When I was walking, I heard two guys speaking super loudly in German. I live in England, so it was a bit unusual, but not anything I thought twice about. They looked about 30, pretty tall, and had caps on, which I remembered because they had matching designs, which I thought was funny. They started getting really close when I glanced back and looked at them. They started jeering, so I knew they were looking at me, which kind of freaked me out, so I sped towards the shop. I had to stop at the road, though. I wasn't planning on getting hit by a car. They eventually caught up with me, but didn't stop for the lights to change. They just walked across and went into the store I was headed for, so I shrugged off my hunger and decided to just go to the canal for my walk. I stopped thinking about the men soon after, chalking it up to me being a generally anxious person. I don't particularly like walking past strangers at night, and I'm self-conscious as it is without them talking to or about me. Anyway, I complete my walk and I'm headed back home. For the story to make sense, I need to describe where I stood. On my right, there's the water canal itself. I'm stood on the path, and to my left, there's a big drop that goes straight onto the main road. Next to that road, there's a row of houses, and there's a railway bridge in front of me. I have my earphones in, and my music is pretty loud, but I think I hear someone shouting, so I take one earphone out and listen. It's pretty silent apart from passing cars and the road below me, though. That's when I see two men heading towards the bridge, and I immediately recognize them as the two German guys who had walked into the shop earlier. I stop walking as my anxiety floods back, and consider phoning somebody because I irrationally think if I'm on the phone when they walk past me, they won't bother me. But despite the fact I've been standing there frozen for ages, no one comes out from under the bridge. I wait, staring at the bridge for a while in complete confusion, because there's no way they could have just vanished. I can see through the other side of the bridge, so I knew they didn't turn around and walk away or anything. But they certainly hadn't walked through because no one passed me. After a few moments, I start to think I hallucinated them or something. I have a history of hallucinations, but I couldn't explain it any other way. So I started slowly walking towards the mouth of the bridge, and just as I'm about to step in, I see it. The shadow of the men cast across the wall. My blood literally ran cold as I realized what was going on. They were waiting for me at the other side of the bridge, but they must have hidden behind the abutment so I couldn't see them. My mind went to a million different places, panicking what they would do if I walked under the bridge. I was convinced they'd follow me if I stayed where I was and phoned for help. I was certain they'd come out to see what was going on and I'd be trapped. I did the only thing I could think to do. I quietly ran to the fence that separated the canal path from the drop to the main road and climbed it. I waited for a couple moments as the cars passed, but thankfully, I live in a quiet area, so the road was soon empty. I managed to navigate myself so I could lower myself off the bridge without A, making much noise, or B, hurting myself too much at the moment my feet hit the ground. I raced to the side where the houses were and sped walked down the path as fast as I could without making noise, only glancing back when I was nearing the end of the road. The men were still there, next to the bridge. I felt sick and terrified, but I made it home. I don't know what they wanted. I don't know who they were, or if they'll be there again tonight. But I do know I'm not going to be walking at night for a long time. So, strangers under the bridge? Let's not meet. I'm going to tell you the story of a terrifying old creep that has stalked me since I was 16 years old. I'm a 20-year-old female. So basically, to set the scene, I'm an average height, average sized 20-year-old female. I've been told I'm very approachable and perhaps too nice to strangers. I sometimes just don't have the heart to tell people to fuck off, and I definitely should. Obviously, I'm not going to give specific details, but I worked in a restaurant which was inside a bigger shopping center. My stalker, an old man named Eric, worked for the actual shopping center itself and not the store inside it, unlike myself. When I was 16 and started the job, I was quite timid and awkward, and let anyone say pretty much anything to me. I didn't quite know what to say when older customers and other employees would make inappropriate comments to me. I would simply just laugh off whatever people would say or not respond. In my 16-year-old mind, this was a lot easier to handle without confrontation. I had another friend at the job who was my age, and her name was Jessica. Jessica had worked there longer than I had, and one day, she asks me if I've heard of this guy who worked at the shopping center named Eric. Jessica described Eric as very strange. She didn't describe him as frightening or unsettling, or even someone to be afraid of, just a very eccentric man. Really, she and the other employees would laugh at his odd sayings and awkward behavior. Jessica has also told me that Eric had bought her a present on Valentine's Day. Chocolate, to be exact. Anyone would think this was friendly behavior or harmless flirting, if he wasn't a 50-or-something-year-old man bringing chocolates to a 16-year-old he barely even knew. I began to see for myself that Eric wasn't just an innocent old man with a slight crush. He had other intentions. The first time I remember Eric approaching me was when I was filling up a machine near the entrance of my work. This machine was out of view of all the other employees, and the restaurant was pretty empty. So this was pretty much the perfect time for a creep to approach me without being seen. Eric wasn't supposed to enter my place of work when he was working at the shopping center, so he had deliberately gone out of his way to come and speak to me. To describe his appearance, he's your typical creepy old loner. He was gaunt, had gray hair with bald patches, and had beady little eyes which he never averted from yours, and I can't get them out of my head till this day. Eric must have sneaked up on me. As I looked up, he was standing right next to me, a little too close. I could feel his breath on my cheek. He then inched closer and asked, "Lucy, are you married?" He almost giggled after asking me this. He had a smirk on his face which made me feel as if he was trying to pretend that he thought I was older than I was, and at 16, I looked 16. Eric liked to ask me questions that he already knew the answer to, just to see what my reaction would be, letting me know in his own way that he had been looking up information about me on social media. He would do this frequently. I began to clock on to the fact that Eric had been going a little further than just approaching me at work, and instead, stalking my social media accounts in the weeks following to my first encounter, such as Twitter and Instagram. When he began asking me very specific questions about things I had posted in the days before. For example, I had posted on Instagram about a tattoo I got, which was homage to my favorite band. I was serving a customer one day, only to be interrupted by a shrill but quiet voice. It was Eric. His eyes were huge, and he had a look of pure excitement and menace on his face. He had yet again entered my workplace when he wasn't supposed to, just to talk to me. He then asked me, "Lucy, what's your favorite MCR song?" Eric relished in my discomfort. You could see by my reaction that I was clocking onto the fact that he had been viewing my personal social media, and the thought of that made my blood run cold. I felt disgusted and violated. The tattoo I had gotten was covered by my work uniform, so the only way he could have seen it was by going through my Instagram page. This creeped me out majorly, but somehow I just forced myself to forget about it and carried on working. Over the course of a few months, Eric would come into my workplace more and more frequently, asking me bizarre questions and reciting back to me things that I had already tweeted about or posted on Instagram. Every time I would see him, I would get visibly uncomfortable, and he liked this. This is what he wanted. All while this was happening, Jessica approached me and let me know that Eric had followed her in his car on her walk home from work, slowing down to ask her where she lived. I had also been told other disturbing news about Eric from multiple different people. It seemed as if he was becoming more invested in whatever intentions were towards me and Jessica. News had traveled to one of my managers about Eric's unsettling actions towards me, and this new manager informed me that a few years ago, Eric was rumored to have followed a young girl who used to work for our restaurant into the toilet. Things didn't quite make sense to me. He was known for being a creep, yet he was still employed at the shopping center? On one hand, I was glad to know I wasn't just creeped out for no reason, but on the other hand, I was frightened as he'd been doing this for years and yet no one had stopped him. Anyways, there was another woman who worked at the same job. Her name was Rebecca, and she had some sort of disability which caused her to befriend and be trusting to people without knowing anything about them. It seems that Eric took advantage of her, as he had asked for her phone number, and she gave it to him. Rebecca had shown me her text with Eric. He had been texting her things like, "Rebecca, are you alone?" and "Rebecca, are you sat on the bus alone?" But the most unsettling part of it was a text from Eric that read, "Rebecca, could you please let me know any information on the girls at work, at the restaurant?" I was stunned. This was quite slowly turning into my nightmare. I was constantly questioning why this old man was so hell-bent on finding out everything to do with my life. Why? Why me? He had gone out of his way to source information about me through a vulnerable person I worked with, and I was scared he was going to go further. Again, this creeped me out, but still, for some reason, I either forgot about it or brushed it aside and carried on with my life, which was very hectic at the time, and in a way, I'm grateful I didn't have the time to dwell on Eric's growing obsession. However, this was something I wouldn't be able to ignore forever, as Eric began inserting himself into my life in ways I couldn't just ignore or brush off. One night, I was watching the movie Grease with my family, and I must have tweeted something stupid like, "Grease is my favorite film," because it's a great film, right? Anyways, the morning after my tweet, Eric approaches me in his unusual way and utters, "You like the film Grease, Lucy?" The same unusual smirk lit up his face, and the usual wave of disgust washed over me. He was really making it a point to let me know he was watching me. I tried to carry on with my day, but spent the entirety of my shift feeling a little shaken up. To someone reading this story, it may not seem as unsettling to you as it did to me at the time, but when someone is going out of their way to make sure you know they know information about you, you spend every waking hour thinking about what they plan to do with this information, and why they insist on taunting you with this knowledge. The very second I clocked out of work and got into my car, my phone went off. This was a notification for PayPal. I clicked on this notification only to see that I received £3 from Eric Stanley, and the note attached to it read, "To Lucy, Grease is the word, from Eric." He literally found my PayPal account and sent me £3 with a quote from the movie attached to it. If this wasn't crazy enough, in the days following, I received a string of anonymous calls. Unrelenting calls. One after the other. I was in floods of tears and ended up having a huge panic attack. I felt like there was no escape. My phone rang and rang and rang all night. I had to turn it off to get away. Even when I turned my phone back on, the calls continued, and every time my phone would ring, my head felt like it was being impaled with the sharpest knife in the world. I was on complete edge. The phone calls that I did answer to were just someone breathing down the phone, making a point to breathe heavily. I even swear that they were trying to sound like they were jerking themselves off, which sickened me. I had no proof that this was Eric, but it wasn't hard to put two and two together after all the lengths he had gone in order to track down my personal information. If he had found out my PayPal address, my phone number, and all my social media accounts, what was stopping him from finding out where I live, breaking in, hurting me or my family? That night, I had horrific dreams in which he chased me around the house and taunted me for hours. I still have similar dreams and struggle to sleep without my boyfriend present, as I'm scared he's standing right outside my door to this day. I reported Eric to my managers, and they passed my complaint on to the managers of the shopping center. At this point, I was genuinely scared for my safety. Multiple girls added to my statement and added details of times they had witnessed Eric's unsettling behavior, or times he had been inappropriate with them too. Eric had then been cautioned by the management of the shopping center, yet nothing was done, except the fact that he was warned to not talk to me. Eric found ways around the no talking to Lucy rule. He would make animal noises at me when he would see me, like a monkey or a dog, or any bizarre noise that would get my attention. I think he just wanted me to think that he had outsmarted me and found a way around the rules. After this, I stopped working at the restaurant as a full-time job and saw Eric less and less, which was obviously great for me. I moved cities as I went away for university and made new friends which distracted me from my old life in my hometown. I still thought about Eric every now and then, and when I focus on it for too long, I can't be alone, out of fear that he is still keeping tabs on me. The thought of that terrifies me. After moving away and starting my new life, I forgot all about the twisted little man who used to obsess over me at my old job. I forgot he existed, but I was soon going to remember. On Christmas Day, I was back home in my hometown with my parents. My phone buzzed, and I expected it to just be another message from a friend or a family member. But I was wrong. I received a notification from my PayPal, and it was the exact amount, £3, only not from Eric this time, but from a girl whose name I didn't recognize at all. I opened up the PayPal app, only to see a note attached to this payment I had received. The note read, "Sending on behalf of Eric." My blood ran cold again. I'd forgotten all about this man and all he had done to make me feel unsafe and unsettled. And here he was again, antagonizing me. Yet this time, doing it through other people. Perhaps his way of telling me that him being banned from talking to me himself won't stop him from entering my world. I threw my phone down on the ground, and I spent the night drinking with family until I forgot about the notification. I probably should have told someone about it, but I just wanted to do as much as I could to block him out. I didn't want him to control me anymore. And since I haven't seen or heard anything from him, and I want it to stay that way. I think Eric still works at the shopping center and lives local to me. I avoid my old workplace so I don't have to see him, and he doesn't have to see me. So, to the creepy, beady-eyed freak that made me live in fear, let's not meet again. Hi everyone, Mad Chatter here. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in on this Let's Not Meet compilation. If you enjoy creepy content like this, consider liking this video and subscribing. It really goes a long way. As a primary no-sleep narrator, I decided I wanted to branch out and venture into other types of horror content. So be sure to let me know in the comments if you want me to make more videos like this. I'd also like to thank everyone who submitted their stories and to all the other narrators who pitched in for this video. Links to their channels will be down in the comments section. Again, thanks for tuning in, and you'll be sure to hear from me very, very soon. Bye for now, and remember, when all goes wrong in the night and everything's the matter, you'll be sure to hear of it from the Mad Chatter.